So Jackson Sgro was Rookie of the Year, huh?
Yeah, I mean, he had a breakout year. When he was being recruited, he was just like a great guy, but nobody thought he was going to be the Rookie of the Year. And then when the season started, he just started like hitting home runs. And I remember the first home run he hit, everybody was like, "Oh my God, this short kid just hit a home run! Like that's great." And then he just kept hitting them and didn't look back.
Dude, that's crazy. What was your first impression of Jackson Sgro when you met him?
Yeah, I mean he's the man. I mean he wills himself to all of the success he has on a baseball field. Like super gritty player, super excited to lay out for a ball. I mean I was hanging out with him last weekend and we went surfing for like 6 hours, and then I think that's when I met you. And then we went and played 18 holes of golf afterwards. And it's like he just doesn't stop. He's got a crazy motor. So yeah, he's the man.
Yeah, I like that guy a lot. He does some goofy shit sometimes, but overall, like he's a good person to be around, and he's always winning at whatever he's doing. So
Yeah, absolutely.
tell me about your season, man. So I mean, you guys came pretty far, no?
Yeah, we had a really good season. We made it to the conference championship. We had one of the best offenses in the country, so it was really exciting just to be around some really really good players, some really good baseball. So I'm a pitcher, and our pitching staff we had an okay season this year, but we had a lot of ups and downs. Just given the nature of Division III baseball, we have some really stiff competition, and the Centennial Conference specifically. So it was great as a team making it all that far, and individually I was coming back from an injury last year. So last year I had a back injury, so I was out for most of the year. So it was really exciting for me to come back and like have a good year and be able to pitch the whole season.
Yeah, how did the back injury happen?
So this was the beginning of my sophomore year. I actually started off with a knee injury. It wasn't really an injury as much as just something that was bugging me. And so I changed my squat form to kind of like compensate for my knee. And in the process, I just got into like a really extended position doing some like box squats instead of traditional back squats. And so the kind of like repetitive motion of going a little bit too heavy on like a really loaded extended movement, as well as like some of the throwing volume I was doing, led to a pars fracture. So it was just kind of like a stress fracture in one of my vertebrae, which was definitely a pain. But the worst part is that usually it's better in 3 to 4 months, but just given the timing of it, it happened just before February. I think it was like right after the new year that I started having like the symptoms and whatnot. So normally it's 3 to 4 months rest and then you're back at it, but 3 to 4 months rest would have been the entirety of our season. So that was difficult. But I came back for like the very tail end of the season. But I think anybody that's pitched, whether it's arm or back or shoulder or something like that, everybody's gone through some form of injury as a pitcher, because like just the nature of the position is so demanding on like very specific components of your body.
Yeah, man. I mean, when you're pitching, it's like one movement that you're doing over and over again with so much power at once. So I can imagine that over time, like what are the main muscles that you use when you're pitching?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, pitching's a pretty specific sport, or pretty unique sport, pretty unique position within baseball, in that most of the force on your body is on your forearm, your bicep, your shoulder, and then to lesser and different degrees, kind of your core, your back, and your legs. But really, most of that force is put into your elbow. And so a lot of guys are having Tommy John surgery, which is the surgery you need to repair your UCL or your ulnar collateral ligament, which is like your main elbow ligament that is under stress when you're pitching. So usually in, say, soccer or basketball or something, they're very demanding, high intensity sports, but the force is kind of spread out over your whole body. You have your knees are weak, or your shins, or your legs, or your upper body, but it's pretty like evenly spread across your whole body, and your kind of your central nervous system is the first thing to go rather than one individual muscle. But so as an example, for myself, like I was a starter this last season, which meant I pitched once a week. So I would go out on a Friday or Saturday and I would throw about 100 pitches or so, and then I wouldn't pitch again until that same time next week because of the recovery time necessary for my arm.
That's a whole week?
Yeah. So that's pretty standard across baseball across the major leagues, if you watch, they have, these rosters have 15 to 20 pitchers on them, or at least that's kind of like where our team has 15 to 20 pitchers, because so many guys either go down with an injury or require a lot of time to recover after pitching. So it's really interesting from a coaching perspective at that point, because if you have your best pitcher, for example, last year we had one guy's name was Mike Urbeta, and he was by far ace. He threw like 92 miles an hour. He's at Fordham now pitching Division I baseball.
Is that the school in the Bronx?
Yeah. And so he was like our guy, right? And so he was still only able to pitch once a week, which is a really interesting coaching decision, because it's which game do you throw him? Do you want to throw him when the other team's throwing their best guy? How do you follow that up, right? He can only throw 100 pitches, so if he throws 100 pitches, you still need another pitcher to finish that game. So there's a lot of strategic decisions when it comes to how to use pitchers and which pitchers to throw in what situations.
I don't know that it was such a complex process for pitchers. So
Yeah.
you're telling me even at the highest level, some of the best pitchers in the world will like pitch once and then go 7 days without doing anything?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah, usually it's I think big leagues, like they have different rotations, it's called. So pitching rotation implies that you have different guys that go on different days. So a normal structure for a pitching staff, it's called, is you have, at least at Division III level, 4 starters. So you have a guy that pitches at your Tuesday game, a guy that pitches your Friday game, and then 2 different guys that pitch your Saturday doubleheader. So those are like your starters, and they go and they pitch as long as they're performing well. They pitch as much as they can in any given game that they're pitching in. So if I'm starting a game, I want to go at least 6 or 7 innings and throw 100, 110 pitches. But the second I'm pulled out of that game, they put a different pitcher in, either because I'm not performing well or because my arm's fatigued. At that point, I'm just training and recovering until that time next week. And it's not only strategic, it's usually because I physically can't pitch until that time next week.
If you tried, it would just be all over the place.
Yeah, it's just not, you're not a productive member of the team until you have a couple of days of rest under your belt and your muscles can kind of recover enough to throw at the same velocity, throw some of the off-speed pitches that you would need in order to succeed at any competitive level of baseball.
Interesting. So I'm curious what your season looks like then. So let's say, were you one of the 4 starters or for Haverford?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're pitching once a week for the team. You're going 7 days. So are you doing other forms of training in those 7 days, like that are giving your other muscles rest, but you're still doing something, or is this completely off?
Yeah, totally. So we practice 6 out of 7 days a week, and so a lot of the best pitchers you'll find in any level of baseball take their training very seriously, even outside of the one day that they're really performing. So, I pitch super high intensity, my arm's super fatigued on a Saturday, and then let's say the Sunday after that I take completely off. I go for a walk, I do something non-baseball related, but then kind of once that Monday hits, I'm back at strength training. So I'm doing some form of in-season strength training lifts, which are very different than my out-of-season lifts, to keep them kind of lower intensity and the focus on recovery. But I need to maintain strength in my lower body, my core, and my upper body over the course of the season. So on a Monday, it would be usually a lower body lift. So I'm doing back squats and lunges and a lot of explosive movements as well. So a lot of plyometrics, jumps, med ball throws, to keep the kind of like systems that assist your arm. Kind of like if your arm is throwing the pitch, it's the last piece of the puzzle. So or they call it like the tip of a whip, right? You need the rest of your body to be really strong and agile to kind of propel your arm to the speeds it needs to be. So Monday, Tuesday, you're doing strength training, and when you're out of practice, you're throwing, but at a low intensity to kind of recover and make sure your arm and your body doesn't forget how to throw, right? If you're recovering, that means that you've created a bunch of micro tears and a lot of damage to your muscles, and so you don't want them to just heal. You want them to heal in a pattern that's going to make you stronger and better for your next outing. And so you do that by continuing to throw in between kind of high intensity sessions, so that while your body's recovering, it's recovering in a way that's really adapting to the demands of.
So what does that look like?
Yeah, so it's usually low intensity throwing is the best way to do that. So low to moderate intensity throwing, we use different weighted balls to kind of put different types of stress on your arm in different ways that promote recovery and promote different modifications to your like muscular system and your structures that allow you to get into some of the positions needed to throw hard and effectively. So Monday and Tuesday are kind of some of the more strength training focused days, and then as you kind of get closer to the day you're pitching, you kind of wean off of the higher intensity lifting, higher intensity throwing, and you focus more on preparing yourself for those high stress environments. So you do a lot of mobility, a lot of stretching, maybe some still light throwing, and usually at some point during the week you try to throw another bullpen. And so a bullpen means like you're throwing off the mound at a lower intensity than you would in a game. So you're not, if you throw 90 miles an hour in a game, maybe you're throwing 80 miles an hour in your bullpen. So that's very individual. A lot of guys have very different ways of going about that. But at some point, usually you want to kind of refine that skill that is pitching off the mound, which requires technique more so than just physical ability. So it's a highly like customizable structure. Those like 6 days you don't pitch, and again, that's specific to a starter. Whereas if you're a closer or you're somebody that comes into more games for shorter amounts of time, then that process that looks very different than for a starter.
So at the D3 level and even maybe at higher levels, is there different approaches different teams take within the same league of how they want to do it? Like, is there one team out here pulling 4 starters and there's other teams that are like, we're gonna have 3 pitchers per game or something like that? Like, is it variable?
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's very much a question of like your coaching strategic decisions. So there's one team in our conference, McDaniel College, and so what they do, it's very unorthodox, but it's been effective. They've been a good team the last couple of years. Is they don't really have any traditional starters. They have every pitcher throw on average 2 innings a game. So if you have 3 pitchers that all throw 2 innings in a game, or 4 or 5 pitchers that all throw 2 innings in a game, that means that they require less time to recover. So then they can pitch again later in the week. So if you have a guy Tuesday that throws 2 innings, he can then throw again Friday 2 innings. Whereas if you have a guy throw 7 innings on Tuesday, he can't pitch again until next Tuesday. So that's a more unorthodox approach where you have a lot of guys that should throw less or higher frequency, less volume. But other teams have also experimented with the idea of an opener or somebody that pitches a lower volume at the beginning of the game to allow a starter to go deeper into a game. Some teams prefer middle relief guys, which means you have guys that go kind of middle volume, right? So you don't necessarily have guys that are throwing 100 pitches, but they're also throwing more than just 2 innings or 1 to 2 innings. So there's a lot of strategy involved in that.
That's crazy. I mean, it's a whole world that I know existed.
Yeah.
I think the training of pitching is so interesting too, because your whole life at this point is working on this one movement, right? And I'm sure they can get boring over time, or maybe it's even exciting that you have like one thing you're trying to perfect. And I'm curious, like in your head, every athlete's probably doing a bunch of dynamic movements and trying to improve in different areas. Like if I'm a specific sport player, I might want to get my strength up, I might want to get my athleticism up. But for you, it's like you're perfecting this one movement meticulously over and over again. So does that get boring, or do you like that kind of training more? Or?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we had a pitching coach my freshman year who said, I think this was, I don't know if he came up with this or this was quoting somebody else, but he said, excelling in monotony is an invaluable component to general success in life. And so what that means is being able to kind of excel at monotonous tasks and take pride in the fact that what you're doing is very repetitive and boring, but necessary, and you're going to have the same intensity no matter if it's fun or a not fun activity. If you know it's what you're supposed to be doing that with real intensity and focus is really valuable. And the best pitchers you meet are guys that have their routine and they stick to it. And it's not always super exciting. It's not always, super flashy. It's not always fun. But what's required to master this repetitive movement is a repetitive routine. And so, yeah, my routine has kind of changed over the years, and you still need to, don't get me wrong, change things when you get new feedback and when there's new stimulus and you grow and your body changes, especially from youth baseball to collegiate baseball. You need to modify those routines, but once you're confident in your routine, once you're confident in your training, being able to really take pride in the fact that it's not always going to be fun and exciting is something that I think leads to a lot of success.
Yeah, it's interesting, man. So you like that overall? Like even like I guess some people are not built for it. You know, some people are like, I can't do something that's so monotonous. And I mean, there's some variability as you described that you're getting feedback, you're changing things. But overall, like this is a type of journey you enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love it. I think the best pitchers are more in love with the process that it takes to become a good pitcher than they are with the result of being a good pitcher, if that makes sense. So, rather than, for myself, I find much more fulfillment and joy in putting in a really good day's work of training than I do in, performing. Because especially in baseball and pitching, where your performance is dictated by things that are out of your control, right? So I could feel my best, I could prepare the best, I could throw the best pitch in the world, but because the batter is something I can't control, and my fielders and the field I'm playing at varies in size by where you're playing, and the wind and these different conditions, and the fact that a ball or a strike is determined by another human being, an umpire, the result of your training is more or less out of your control. And so for guys that, it's obviously important to be really competitive and to want to win, but for the guys that develop the skills to be really good pitchers, really what they enjoy, from my experience, from what I found, is the training process. It's how am I going to get better today, and today being the middle of August, and I'm not going to need to really I'm not going to be able to see the reward, or I'm not going to be able to see the result of that training until, say, February or March, right? So the guys that can buy into that really long process of the training I'm doing today is not going to help me for a while. I think that's been the key to a lot of success in pitching, given that it's really specific to. It's a unique position in that. And the other thing I was going to mention as well is pitching is really specific in that your performance environment is very hard to replicate in a training environment, right? So if you're a basketball player, you could go play pickup basketball somewhere, and that pickup basketball is going to replicate a game in terms of intensity. And if you're playing with competitive people, it's going to get chippy, and you're going to be exhausted, you're going to be sweating, and it feels like you're playing in a game. It's different, might not be people in the stands, but you're more or less doing what you're going to be asked to do in a game environment. Same thing like a soccer, or even, if you're an offensive player in baseball, right? You can face somebody pitching, or you can face a machine that's throwing a ball really hard very often. But as I mentioned earlier, in order to throw at a high intensity, your body needs like this long time to recover. And so that means, when I go later today and I'm going to go train, I can't throw at a high intensity because I'm going to be throwing at a high intensity tomorrow. And I can't face batters and put myself in that kind of game-like environment because, that's not what the training demands of me right now because of the physical limitations. So that means pitchers have a very difficult time practicing in the environment that they're performing in. And I think if you talk to a lot of elite athletes, they'll say, you want your training environment to be harder than your performance environment. And so if you're a hitter, you want to see 95, so when you're facing 90 in a game, it looks slow. Or if you're a basketball player, you want to face guys that are, 5 inches taller than you, so then when you're facing somebody that's your height, it seems easier. But if you're pitching, how do you create an environment that's more difficult than your performance environment, given that your performance environment is a very difficult thing to replicate, given the limitations of, the muscular strength and recovery times between training sessions, given the kind of unique circumstance of, in order to have a game environment with high pressure, you need a batter and an umpire and fielders and this whole big elaborate setup. So going back to your question of like, if that training is something I enjoy, and that training meaning something that is not necessarily game-like, I would say, yeah, like I think finding ways to make it competitive, finding ways to compete against yourself, finding ways to compete against other guys in the weight room rather than just on the mound is really valuable for when you get into that performance environment feeling confident, because it's difficult to kind of get those game reps under your belt without many years of game experience.
Yeah, it is very unique in that way, and I never really thought about that because in pretty much any sport, in some way you can replicate it, and in a harder way than the actual game. And I feel like baseball, there's so many moving pieces, at least for your position, that it's like, how do you even practice this specifically? And I mean, do you take advantage of like the off season then to like somehow make that harder than your training environment, or like how do you like overcome that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so you mentioned earlier that baseball being, or specifically pitching being like a skill as much as it is a feat of athleticism, right? So if you're 6'5" and 200 pounds, right, you're probably gonna beat somebody at basketball that's 5'10", 160 pounds, right? Whereas in pitching, and specifically, right, if you can't throw the ball over the plate, the other team's gonna win 10 out of 10 times. So it's a skill as much as it is just pure athleticism, pure size. And so the training that I really enjoy is the technical aspect of it as well, right? So my freshman year, I had, so like the way you throw the pitch is called like your mechanics, like the way your body organizes itself to throw. And there's a lot of emphasis on refining your mechanics to kind of optimize the way that you're throwing the ball so that it's more consistent and you're throwing the ball harder. So my freshman year, I came in, I hadn't really worked with a pitching coach much, and so my mechanics weren't great. I had a lot of room for optimization, a lot of room for improvement. And so what I really enjoyed was working with our pitching coach to do these kind of drills that allowed my body to organize itself in a way that was more optimal for performance, right? And so that looked like me at 7 a.m. in our field house, kind of doing dry reps, or just working monotonously at this task of creating a pattern my body will follow without intentional thought. And that in no way, shape, or form looked like pitching in a game, right? So just be, or even throwing a plyo ball or like a weighted ball against the wall with a specific constraint that meant my body would organize itself in one way or another, with the long-term goal of being, that then being my default movement pattern by the time I step on the mound, was a really exciting training process for me. So to answer your question, yeah, I loved that, even though that didn't require a game environment in any way, shape, or form. And to the untrained eye, it's like, what the heck's that guy doing over there, right? That doesn't look anything like pitching. So there's absolutely like this technical skill, physical component of it that is not pure athleticism. And so I really enjoy training that. And so by the time you get onto the mound, and obviously you need the physicality as well, but I enjoy training that to a degree where you feel like your source of confidence comes from the fact that you've done that training, you've done the skill component of pitching.
That's very interesting, and it kind of brings up this other question in my head about progressing as a pitcher, because I'm sure at different levels the rates of progress will be different. When you're young, you can probably increase your pitching speed significantly every few months, every few years, and I think at a certain point, maybe getting from 85 to 87 to 89, I don't know how hard that is, especially when you're pitching at such a low volume compared to how much volume other people put into other sports. And for some people, 3 bad days is like can be done in like 1 week, right? But 3 bad pitching days could almost elongate to like almost half a season. So I'm curious like what the progress has been like. You've been playing baseball for a while now. Now it's your senior year, so you've really seen how progress has looked over the last 4 years too. So how would you describe like the process of progressing like year to year, or like increasing your pitching speed or your technique?
Yeah, progress in pitching is, given how unique pitching is, it's definitely nonlinear. You have big jumps and then you go back down. And I think if you talk to anybody that's a collegiate pitcher, they'll say, just simply maintaining your current skill level is a full-time job, because in order to throw greater than 80 miles an hour, you need these physical adaptations that are not natural to the human body. And so in order to maintain those, you need to be throwing at a high velocity, you need to be recovering well, you need to be strength training. And so even to maintain your current ability is a really rigorous process. And so for myself, I saw the most progress kind of early in my career, my collegiate career, freshman and sophomore year. And the progress I'm referring to is kind of more in terms of the tangible, self-inflicted progress, rather than, if you grow 5 inches and you gain 30 pounds, you're probably going to throw a little bit harder, you're probably going to be a little bit better. And so a lot of the progress that is more achievable through effort came, at least for me, my freshman, sophomore year, both by intentionally increasing just pure strength and pure power output. So we have a great strength coach here at Haverford, and he puts together some grueling workouts, both in terms of upper body and lower body strength, and simply gaining a lot of strength and weight, honestly, are both two big factors in terms of just the amount of output you're able to produce. And in turn, also, you can only train at this way if you're recovering well. You can't train if you're hurt. And that happens a lot to pitchers, right? You can't get better at pitching if you have an elbow injury and you can't pitch. And so gaining weight, gaining strength, allowed kind of like my forearm muscles, my arm muscles, my bicep muscle, tricep muscle, my shoulder muscles, my lat muscles, to protect my ligaments better in a way that allowed me to be more consistent in my training. So having a foundation of strength and having a foundation of being in a place where my body could withstand the training that I was doing was a really big jump. So I'd say around my freshman, sophomore year, I probably gained 15, 20 pounds. I put a lot of weight on my bench press, put a lot of weight on my squat, my deadlift, and that was a huge barrier to entry to do some of the higher level training that required more consistent stress on my body. And so then it became a question of, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, of the technical work, right? So putting in reps that refine how my body organizes itself results in higher velocity with lower effort. And so my freshman year, I was fortunate that, I say I was fortunate, but really I came in with mechanics that weren't great. And so by optimizing those, I was able to gain a couple miles an hour. And by increasing my bench press, my squat, I was able to gain a couple miles an hour. And so while no one thing produced some large jump in velocity, some large jump in ability, I kind of had like all these different low-hanging fruits to pick across like all the different training areas, which was really great. And it meant my freshman year, I improved a lot. And then that definitely plateaus at times, right? So then it's like you kind of picked all your low-hanging fruit. What do you do now? And a lot of guys get stuck in that. Kind of feels like you're in a hamster wheel where you're trying really, really hard. You're doing the things that were working in the past, and it's like, how do I get from 85 to 87? How do I get from 87 to 89? And then it becomes very individualized, right? So what works for one person is not going to work for another person, and it becomes a big question of genetics. Some people are just able to move rotationally more powerfully than other people. So there's definitely been a plateau, especially given the amount of effort you need to put in, like I mentioned earlier, just to maintain the status quo. But for myself, like I came in just for like some numbers. My freshman year, I was throwing in the fall when I first got to campus, I think I was like 80 to 82 miles an hour. I mean, we topped 84 miles an hour, which is okay. Like it's all right. It's not, especially today's day and age with like high focus on velocity training for kids trying to get recruited, was nothing special. And so working with our pitching coach, refining my mechanics, refining my kind of like strength program, gaining some weight, gaining a lot of strength, throwing more often. By my freshman spring, I think I was up to, I remember my freshman spring, I was up to 89.1. That was like a really big deal for me because it was, I think, a 4 mile an hour jump from my all-time best, which was 85 in high school.
This was like in a game, or when you measured it? Or
this was in a game.
So you measured every game? It was like
yeah. Okay. That's a great thing to talk about. So I can talk about that after, kind of like the way we track those metrics.
Cool. Yeah.
So my freshman year started like 82, 84. By my freshman spring, I was up to, I would say 86 to 87, and then I touched 88, 89. And then my sophomore fall, I was up to 90 for the first time, but obviously got hurt. And so, there's a huge setback when you get hurt. I can't lift, I can't throw, I can't do these things that are required just to maintain my current ability, much less to progress. And so I definitely regressed a little bit, but by my spring of my sophomore year, like the very tail end, when I was able to start throwing again, I was back up to where I was at the end of my freshman year, like upper 80s. And then this past season, my junior year, my junior spring, I'd say my average velocity increased a little bit. So my average velocity was 87, 88 instead of 86, 87. And I was consistently hitting 89, 90 miles an hour instead of just kind of like touching it every once in a while. And I think my best velocity was 91 in a game. So
All time now, or?
yes,
Okay.
all time.
Nice.
And so there's some nuance there because our radar gun, the one that we use, gets a decimal point, and it was 90.6, and then the one that was used in the stadium that I was pitching at was 91. And so I want to talk about that afterwards, like the way that these data.
That must be so stressful, man.
It's like the way that things are collected and the arguments you have afterwards with your teammates about, well, this radar gun said this velocity and this one said that velocity. Well, which one do you take? Well, do you take the higher one? Do you take the lower one?
I'll take the higher
Do you
one.
take the middle one? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like you take the higher one when you're talking with your friends, but if you're talking to somebody that is in the baseball world, they'll be like, oh yeah, you're probably taking the higher one. They kind of can sniff it out. But yeah, so anyway, going back to the question of progress, right? So for pitching, the progress beyond that kind of like initial jump people can make once they're like taking their training seriously, that progress can be really slow. It can be nonlinear. You could throw 90 miles an hour in a game for the first time and feel, ecstatic. And then you get a couple bad nights sleeps, your arm's still worn out, and then the next day you're up to 85, right? So it's just because you reach a number. Yeah, like the amount that your velocity changes is extraordinary relative to kind of other sports where if you're a power lifter and your best deadlift is 405, you're not just going to like wake up and only be able to do 315, right? You're more or less going to be able to do 405, and you got to recover a little bit. But that's definitely not the case in pitching. It's like you need to work really hard to maintain these things that are often out of your control in terms of like how you feel on any given day is not always going to be how the way you want to feel.
Interesting, man. So you had that big jump first 2 years. Obviously, the injury kind of slowed the progress down, and you were able to eventually hit, we'll say 91.
Call 91, yeah.
So obviously you need technique, but it seems like the way you're describing it, when you progress the most, it was correlated with also your bench going up, your squat going up, your body able to take on more stress. So do you think those external ways to measure progress are usually correlated with progress in pitching, or is like if I just keep pitching over and over again, will my speed go up, or do I need to like be doing strength training, velocity training? Like that's like the main way I can see that, oh yeah, if I do these things, if an individual increases squat by 45 pounds, he's probably going to be able to pitch more now. Is it directly correlated like that, or?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's a very individual position, right? Pitching, the way I pitch is very different than the way some of my teammates pitch. And so there's kind of two different, there's definitely more than two different ways to pitch, but so there are certain guys that are kind of like more slim, they're much quicker, fast twitch, much more rotational, and so they can get away with being kind of like more skinny, more lanky, and kind of relying on their body acting like a bullwhip and snapping in order to throw hard. And so for those guys, adding 30, 40, 50 pounds to their bench press isn't always going to help them because, just having larger muscles is almost an inhibitor because those guys that are more lanky, more quick rotators, they're really going to rely on those fast twitch muscles and getting into those like end range mobility positions. And so having larger muscles means you have tighter muscles typically, and so they might not be able to get into those deeper ranges of motion. So for some guys, focusing more on mobility, focusing more on agility is more closely correlated to increasing their velocity. For a guy like myself, I'm not all that whippy, as we refer to it as. I'm not kind of like naturally a really fast rotator, and so for myself and kind of other people similar to me, having a much stronger foundation of strength is really beneficial because I'm more reliant on the power output of my muscles rather than kind of getting into a deep range of motion and really firing out of that. So I would say everybody can benefit from adding some weight to their bench press and to their back squat, and that's very much a new school methodology and thought process that has been kind of more widely accepted in the last 15, 20 years, where guys are, probably even less than that, 10 years, where guys are starting strength training younger and younger because it definitely has a close correlate to your velocity. But I think the best guys, and if you look at some major leaguers, there's plenty of guys that aren't lifting super heavy, but instead focusing more on their mobility, focusing more on those like end range positions. So there's really is a spectrum for a lot of guys of what kind of thrower are you. Some guys are really strong but don't throw that all that hard because they're not flexible enough. Some guys are plenty flexible but they're not strong enough. So it really is individual. But if I had to make a blanket statement, there's usually can't hurt to have 15, 20 pounds on your bench.
Yeah. Interesting, man. The computer's still going, right?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, man, that's sick. When you hit 91 on that one day in game. Was it like a huge jump from the last time, and it was just totally unexpected, or was it? I mean, you said it's obviously not a linear progress, but how often is it you'll pitch one game and you're like, where the fuck did that number come from? Was it like that, or how did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's had those days where, I mean, you've had them on both ends of the spectrum, right? Where you're throwing and you're like, man, I feel phenomenal today. Like everything just clicking, the body's syncing up really well, and that definitely happens. And there's also the days where you have the opposite. It's like I've been doing everything right and it just doesn't feel right. Things aren't going well, but most days are somewhere in the middle. On this given day, I would say it was towards the higher end of that spectrum. Like I was feeling good, but by no means was it just like things suddenly started working, right? Like throughout the leading up to that game, I was probably 88 to 90, and I was like right around that number. And so when you're talking about 90 versus 91 miles an hour, like you're really talking about technology as well. How are you measuring that? Like you could have 3 different devices give you 3 different numbers. So I mean, to answer your question a little more directly, no, it was pretty similar to where I had been that season, but it's kind of like this arbitrary mark every time you reach a new velocity. That's like really validation of the work that you've been putting in, validation that you've been taking the right steps, more so than some great feat on one day.
Gotcha. Okay, that's cool, man. So I want to learn more about like technology, because I'm sure that's something you guys talk about all the time. Like, oh, that's a shitty gun, or that. Like, I can only imagine, because it's so hard to tell like if how good a gun is, because there's nowhere to measure that, right? I can't visually see if how fast that ball was going, and it's like kind of like a weight scale where it's like you step on it, like this weight scale is different from that one. And so how does the whole thing with technology work, especially at the highest levels? Like, is there a way of calibrating it, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, baseball, when you're talking about numbers at baseball, they're kind of synonymous. Like you can't have one without the other. And if you go to any baseball game now, any Major League Baseball game, and you look up at the scoreboard, it looks like a math equation. Like the number of different numbers and decimal points and letters that like are all describing different advanced analytics is absurd, and especially in comparison to any other game. And so when it comes to velocity and measuring with a radar gun, I would say that's the most simple version of any of these advanced analytics. And for us at Haverford, being a school full of some really intelligent guys that like to get into those nitty-gritty numbers and a bunch of math, econ, CS majors, we have all of those numbers and we look at all of them. So for each game, we have these guys, we refer to them as charters, and so they're typically pitchers that had recently pitched or are injured. And so, if I pitch on a Friday and I'm not going to pitch that Saturday, I sit in the stands with some of my other fellow pitchers that aren't pitching that day, and we usually have 2 iPads and a radar gun. And so for each pitch that's thrown, both from our guys and the other team, we record in these kind of custom-made Google Sheets or Excel sheets or whatever. We record a bunch of data points on each pitch that's thrown, right? So we record who's pitching, who's catching, or who's pitching, who's hitting, what type of pitch is thrown, how hard it was thrown, which we get from the radar gun, where it was thrown, whether it was a ball or strike, was it hit by the batter? If it was hit, what was the outcome of that hit? And was it an out? If so, which out was it? So we kind of get all these like baseline data points, and then from that we can derive these advanced analytics on any one person. So we build a database of a pitcher, say for example, for our own pitchers. And so you had a bad outing, and you can go back to these charts and you can look at each pitch you threw, where you threw it, what the outcome was. And it's like, okay, well, every time I threw the ball over the middle, it got hit. Okay, well, I shouldn't throw the ball over the middle. It's like the most elementary kind of like derivation you can have of these numbers and these spreadsheets is like what tendencies are leading to what outcomes. But a large part of that is your velocity, right? So I mentioned somebody, a pitcher, a starting pitcher, typically will get pulled out of the game if their performance is starting to, wane. And so a large component of that is their velocity. And so if somebody's throwing 85 miles an hour most of the game, and then they're in the 6th, 7th inning, they're up to 80, 90 pitches, typically what you see is they're 83, 82, 81. And so you start to see the velocity creep down a little bit. And in the same way, you can see somebody have a great game where their velocity is higher than normal, and you can kind of say, work backwards, reverse engineer that. What did I do to lead to higher velocity? So the way the velocity is is recorded is just with one of us with a radar gun. We have supposed to be the latest and greatest radar gun, and we have there's a huge market for data collection in baseball. And so for us, we have kind of like a couple of different versions. We have I'd say the lowest end is called a pocket radar. It's like $200 if I'm correct. And I bought one when I was in high school. It's pretty consumer available. It's just it looks like a small phone. You hold it up and it gets the velocity for you, and they're pretty accurate. But they don't give you a decimal, and they're not the industry standard for high quality. So then we have another more professional radar gun that's a couple years old, and some of the Division I programs and definitely the big league programs have even more advanced data tracking devices, either called a Rapsodo or a Hawkeye or a TrackMan. So we recently got one of those. I think it was last year or 2 years ago. And so it's called the Rapsodo 3.0. It's like the new latest and greatest Rapsodo, where you put it on the ground in between the pitcher and the catcher. And when you throw the pitch, it tells you the spin rate, where it went, the velocity, and all these super advanced analytics.
The spin rate too.
The spin rate, how fast it's spinning, the spin axis, if it's spinning like this or like this, the movement profile, because you're throwing different pitches that are spinning different, going different velocities. But my point being, going back to the velocity question, if you have a pocket radar, the professional radar gun, and a Rapsodo all clocking the same pitch, you could get 2 to 4 mile an hour difference between them sometimes. And so it's really it's a really interesting dynamic, because guys will put so much thought and effort and stock and emotional investment into the velocity of a pitch, but it's kind of arbitrary at some points. You have the stadium, or the radar gun the stadium's using is up 2 miles an hour from the radar gun you're using, which is 2 miles an hour down from the guy next to you's radar gun. So it's really interesting given how foundational these numbers are to baseball.
Yeah, that's interesting, man. It must be useful to have all that data for you to track it. And with AI and stuff, I'm sure you can get so many. It probably makes training a lot easier, because you can kind of look back and really study it and see your patterns in yourself. And so I'm sure it's really important on the training side, but is that something that fans care about too? If you go to a baseball game, will it say the speed of the throw every time someone pitches too, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Nowadays they have even more advanced analytics than that shown after each pitch. But yeah, if you talk to somebody that's in the baseball world, especially in pitching, and you mention that you're a pitcher, usually their first question is, how hard do you throw?
Yeah.
And what they're really asking is, how hard is the hardest ball you've ever thrown? What's your best velocity? Yeah. Nobody's asking for your average velocity. So that can often derail guys, especially younger guys, when you're trying to get recruited, and what coaches are looking for is velocity, and you're competing among your friends, and what they care about kind of socially is velocity. And guys can kind of get derailed, in chasing velocity, when we've had plenty of guys I've seen in my own experience that throw as hard as anybody, but it's because that's all they train. And then they get out on the mound and they're unusable as a pitcher, because all they do is throw hard, but it's going nowhere near the strike zone. And even if it is in the strike zone, the hitters are just as good at hitting velocity as the pitchers are throwing it. So
the technique is off?
So it's there's a whole art of pitching that is deceiving the batter with different pitches that travel different speeds. And there's a concept called tunneling, right? So if I throw a fastball, which goes straight, and a curveball, which goes straight and then dives, you want to throw a fastball first, so the batter thinks it's just going to come straight, and then you throw a curveball that looks like a fastball and then dives off at the last moment. Because if you're only throwing fastballs, then the hitter can time it up really easily and is kind of going to be able to hit that much better than if they don't know, is this going to be 90 miles an hour, or is it going to be 80 miles an hour? Is this going to move left, is it going to move right? So there's a whole art of deceiving hitters that is required in order to be a good hitter, in order to be a good pitcher, that is very much not encompassed by velocity-based training. So you can be a really good pitcher throwing pretty slowly, and slow is relative. Obviously it helps to throw harder because the batter will have less time to react, but especially at the Division III level, every year I always make a joke about it that every year our hitters, which our offense was one of the best in the country this year, so I'm not knocking them in any way, shape, or form, but they always are training against really high velocity. We have these huge machines that'll spit balls out at 90 miles an hour, and they're training like professionals. And then we'll go into a game and a guy's throwing 78 mile an hour knuckleballs, which are like, kind of not a joke pitch, but it's a pitch that people throw that's like thought of as, not high skill. It's like you don't throw high velocity, so you throw kind of like a lot of off-speed pitches, a lot of slow pitches. And these guys that are throwing 75, 80 miles an hour will be, slicing and dicing our hitters that are training against this super high velocity.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it's like, there's an art to pitching where you want to deceive as much as you want to just overpower.
Interesting. So are there any like elite players that throw so slow that it's kind of embarrassing, but their technique is so good that it just overcompensates? Like, is that they're at the highest level?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, the one that comes to mind, and the guy that is most at odds, or the example that is most at odds with this new school velocity-based training philosophy is Greg Maddux. And so he was a Hall of Fame phenomenal pitcher for years and years and years, and he did not throw very fast. But he was an artist when it came to making pitches move in a certain way, making hitters feel uncomfortable by deceiving them in terms of what pitch was coming and where he was throwing them. So I mean, there are numerous professional examples of guys that are really good pitchers, even though they don't throw super, super hard. But that's very much juxtaposed to the guys that are coming up now, both I would start off with in the major leagues, where in order to be a closer in the major leagues, most guys are throwing 98, 100 miles an hour. And that's really a trickle-down effect where guys in Division III now, in order to be a high recruit, you gotta be throwing 85 miles an hour. So it's really like this trickle-down effect of, at the highest level, the advanced analytics say that throwing harder is better, throwing harder makes you a better pitcher. And so people focus on that sometimes a little bit too much in comparison to being more of an artist and deceiving hitters.
Interesting. Do you think, I mean, it's interesting how we're shifting the way we train baseball. I'm sure that's more of a recent shift with the technology, and I guess it's so easy to track like how fast your hitting speed is, because the ability to deceive a hitter is like so arbitrary. Like, how do you measure how good you are doing that, right? So I mean, obviously everyone's gonna opt for the easy way of like, are you 85 versus 90, right? But I'm curious, like, when did this like shift? Because you've probably been playing baseball since you were young, and I'm sure training when you were young compared to how the young train now is probably really different, as you were describing before. So, like, when did this whole shift happen, and how did we kind of get here?
Yeah, I mean, it's really a result of advanced analytics, and ever since we've been able to quantify how a pitch moves, both in terms of its spin rate, its spin axis, its horizontal movement, its vertical movement, its velocity, we've then been able to have some really smart people, a lot of whom are playing baseball at Haverford, kind of create these computer models and derive analytics from those metrics that say, okay, well, most of the time when somebody swings and misses on a slider, that slider is greater than 2,800 RPM and has horizontal movement that is 15 inches less than or 15 inches greater than their fastball. And they have these advanced analytics that you can say, okay, typically a fastball that overpowers a hitter is X mile an hour. And so once you're able to kind of derive those analytics, you can reverse engineer your training to like try to match those analytics. I think the thing that's kind of oversimplified sometimes is pitching is so unique based on the pitcher, right? So a righty versus a lefty, somebody that's thrown over the top versus sidearm, it's not universal. And so a lot of these analytics, once they became available, created what seemed to be a universal style of training, which is optimizing your spin rate and your velocity, which I would say really kickstarted the velocity-based training that is so rampant now, and is honestly, it's understandable because that's what college coaches are looking for. That's what every kid at a high school tournament is trying to do, because that's also what the big leaguers are trying to do. If you want to play big league baseball, you can't be throwing 90, 92 miles an hour anymore, whereas 10 years ago, they would say that guy's a really good pitcher, it's fine that he throws 90, 92. Now it's like, all right, well, how fast does he spin? How many RPMs are on his fastball? How fast is he throwing it? So it's really a trickle-down effect from, at the highest level, it's necessary at this point, ever since the advanced analytics became available.
Well, with this much data tracking now, do you think any average guy, if he put the right training in, could become a good pitcher, or do you think we're shifting more to like, it's more of a genetic advantage based on like who has the capacity to be able to pitch at that speed based on like their muscle structure, their ability to rotate their shoulder? But you think any average guy, if he started early enough with the right training, could reach that potential? Or
Yeah, totally. I mean, if you start early enough at anything, I really think it's possible. But it's it's the nature of athletics. It's the nature of sport where if you're 5'5", it's going to be really hard to get to the NBA, no matter how hard you work. It's like the guys that are the best NBA players in the world also were lucky enough to be born at greater than 6'6", and so there is an element of that to pitching as well, right? You need to have these kind of like core foundational structures in place in terms of your mobility, your height, your weight, that are adjustable to a degree, right? You can't affect your height, but you can stretch and become flexible. You can strength train and become strong. But when it comes to reaching some of the higher velocities necessary now to get drafted and necessary to be at the highest level of baseball, it really is a combination because I think the best pitchers in the world have been doing it for their whole life, and which means you have these physical adaptations that are not easy to obtain, and even those guys struggle to maintain those abilities. So it's really a very difficult thing to just will your way into. You can't just train and train and train and train and be amazing. You really need to like train smart and train intentionally, which is something unique I like about pitching.
Cool, man. So what's the reason you went down the baseball route?
Yeah, I mean, I love pitching for all the reasons we've been talking about. I like other sports. I like playing other sports for fun. But I don't know, I'm not really a fan of just the brute force nature of a lot of different sports, right? Like if you're just taller than somebody, if you're just stronger than somebody, you're going to beat them at that sport. Pitching requires this like art to it, where you need to be able to deceive hitters. And so for me, like I've put a lot of effort into my curveball. Like that's kind of the pitch that I've taken pride in being able to fool a batter with, because as hard as I can throw, somebody else can throw harder, and it's much easier to train these faster velocities now. So you need some way to throw these established hitters off their game. And so you're kind of playing this game of catch up where, a hitter gets an advantage and then the pitcher gets an advantage, where you need to outsmart one another. And especially when you're facing your friends that know who you are and know what kind of pitches you throw, it's this game of chess where you're trying to outsmart somebody as much as you are trying to overpower them. And I like that component of pitching.
Yeah, so when was the moment you made that decision that, I'm going to go down the baseball route? Like, how early was it when you were set on the sport?
Yeah, I mean, the other component, which is like a stereotype of baseball, which is true for me, is like, it's not a cardio sport. And so, I mean, I did track in high school because all my friends were doing long distance track. So my freshman, sophomore year, I signed up and I'd run like 5 to 10 miles after school most days.
Yeah, that's a lot. For track?
Yeah, well, it was like long distance track.
Oh,
so
okay,
it was like,
okay.
it was kind of cross country, but it was during the track season. It was miserable. I hate running.
Does track at any level even have that long of a distance of a...
No, but I think it's like one of those things where you want your practice environment to be harder than your
That's
training,
fair.
or you want your practice environment to be harder than your performance environment, where if you're doing 10 miles every day after school and then you got to go compete in the 2 mile, it's a piece of cake.
Yeah.
And I don't want to insult all the track runners. I'm sure there's more nuance to it, but so I was doing that. I played soccer and basketball growing up, and I liked them, but there's something about pitching that I always stuck with me, and baseball that always stuck with me. I also just really enjoy like throwing things. Like as young as I could remember, and as trivial as it seems, like just being able to be like, I want to hit something over there. Like I have like a rock and I could throw it over there and influence something all the way over there. Like that's kind of cool to me. Or
That's
skipping
interesting.
rocks,
Yeah.
or frisbee. I'd always play frisbee with my dad, like in between my brother's soccer games, and like anything where you're kind of like throwing a projectile, I've always been fascinated to me, and like you kind of like can do something to influence something really far away from you.
And you're a CS major, right?
Yeah.
So how does that fit in the picture with all this? What do you want to do in life?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I mean, the answer that a lot of guys at Haverford have done in connecting those two, kind of like the professional life and baseball, is Haverford has kind of this like network of baseball alums in front offices of professional organizations. So we have a couple of GMs and a bunch of different guys that are like doing advanced analytics for professional baseball teams. And so that's been a traditional connection between baseball and all these advanced analytics and all this like strategic thinking and that demand in the professional world. My path's been a little bit different so far. So coming into college, I knew I wanted to play baseball. I didn't know what I wanted to do professionally. I really enjoyed some components of computer science classes that I took in high school in a similar way to baseball, where right you're coding something, you're working really hard at it, and there's kind of this like long-term delayed gratification where you're beating your head. Yeah, you're beating your head against a wall, figuring out why something doesn't work, and then it clicks, and you have a good day, you have a bad day. I think the main driver for my choosing computer science as a major was just I'm a firm believer in, if you don't know what you want to do something hard until you figure out what you want to do. And so computer science for me was that option. Like, I really enjoy tackling challenging problems. I really enjoy feeling like I'm surrounded by other smart people, and I have a skill that's in demand. And so computer science for me was something I could study at Haverford, and especially at the time that I was going into college, it was a really in-demand field. I could learn a really technical, like hard skill that would kind of work my brain in a different way, and was extremely versatile. So whether I want to work in the front office of baseball, or I want to work in what I'm doing now, my internship over the summer is in tech, or if I want to work in finance, or I want to work in something else, kind of having a computer science degree teaches you how to like think about problems and in one specific way solve them with technology. But it really, for me at least, laid the foundation for doing different things. It gave me like a wide breadth of options. And so that's something I'm really pretty happy about, because given that I didn't know what I wanted to do, I was just like, I'm going to do something that will set me up well for the future, that will give me options to do once those options kind of present themselves.
Yeah, it looks like everything's working out, because now everybody wants CS guys, every single field. So
yeah, I mean it's been interesting with the industry, because I remember going into college and choosing my major. I was talking to one of my other friends. I was going to be a computer science major, and we were talking about how at that time, you get 6-figure salary just by like knowing what Python is.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But now, and so anyway, we were talking at the time that like by the time we graduate, I sure hope it's not oversaturated, and like we can still get jobs. And now the industry is just totally different. And I mean, I have some really, really smart friends that have been struggling to get jobs, just given the nature of the tech industry at the moment, with AI taking jobs and companies kind of like downsizing their software engineering roles. So it's been really like interesting to shift to see, and I'm fortunate that I have at the moment like a really cool internship that has given me like some really cool experience.
Do you want to work there after too, you think? Because you're coming to your senior year now, so yeah.
Yeah, so I've really enjoyed my time there, and so I could see myself working there or somewhere similar. But at the same time, I want to see what's out there. I want to see different options. I want to like get a sense of different industries. But I'm actually doing a graduate program where after my senior year, I'll be doing 1 year for my master's. So I'm not going to be working 1 year out of college. I'm happy to talk about that a little bit more.
Cool, man. Well, yeah, it's an exciting journey. It's a lot of fun to learn about baseball, because I don't know a lot about it, but it's interesting to see like there's this whole world behind baseball. And it was a cool conversation. But do you have any final thoughts, questions, ideas before we?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think baseball, at least for me, has been like a really cool foundation to trampoline my professional career, my personal life. Everything has been influenced by kind of like the lessons I learned with baseball. So we didn't get into much, but like the mental side of pitching, the mental toughness required to kind of like execute this skill that's also very physically demanding, is something I've taken to all aspects of my life. And so like kind of that work that we were talking about with baseball is very much translatable to the real world and working in a team. And I mean, I think that's why I play baseball, and that's how I kind of like justify all the time and effort I put into my training now has been like the dividends that it'll pay in the rest of my life.
Do you think it's mentally more tough than physically, or how does it?
I don't know if I would say more tough, but I would say it's a very mentally demanding position specifically and sport. Yeah.
Do you think it's because you overthink, or like what's the mental toughness about it? That it's like, okay, I'm going here to this game and I have to do this one thing, and like that's the stressful part about it. Like kind of if I'm out on track, it's like a 10-hour lead up to like a 10-second sprint. Like what's stressful about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but right, the nature of pitching is I could throw the perfect pitch at the perfect velocity to the perfect place, and the batter could get absolutely fooled and have a terrible swing at the ball, and then just by happenstance the ball falls and it's a single, and the batter wins and I lose. Or I could throw the perfect pitch exactly where I want it, and the umpire calls it a ball just because, in my eyes, he made a mistake. Or the ball could get absolutely smoked. The batter beats me 110%, unanimous decision. The batter won, I lost. But it just so happens that they hit the ball to one of our fielders and it was an out, and then I actually won. So there's a lot of randomness when it comes to pitching. And I think that is very difficult for a lot of guys to kind of cope with, right? If you're pitching and things aren't going your way, not necessarily because you're doing something wrong, but just because that's how it's going, it's very difficult to mentally stay focused on the things you can control and not kind of let things spiral. So, if you're not performing well, how do you kind of mentally reset to then get back on track with the training that you've done and have confidence in your ability even though things aren't going your way? So that ability to focus on the things that actually help rather than thinking about the outcome, because the outcome is really very much out of your control, is this kind of like game that you have to play with yourself on the mound, which is really difficult. And I mean, the nature of pitching as well is, the game doesn't start until you do. You're holding the ball that starts play, and so there's no hiding, right? If you're a position player and you have a bad at bat, you have a bad play in the field, it's very possible you just don't have to face that again until your next opportunity. But pitching, your next opportunity is in about 15 seconds, and you're not getting out of that situation until you perform. There's nobody coming to save you. So this kind of like isolated feeling, as well as the mental strength required to not let your mind spiral, is something that I think I've seen a lot of guys struggle with, and it's something that I put a ton of effort into, and I think that's been a huge needle mover when it comes to genuine performance rather than raw ability. Because a lot of guys have raw ability, but they get on the mound and you can just see, man, this guy's terrified because his training environment is in a facility, it's indoors, he's throwing a ball against a wall that's 5 feet away. There's no adversity that you need to mentally overcome. But the second you get on the mound and you walk the first guy and then you give up a bloop single, there's a required mental strength that a lot of guys kind of overlook in their training.
I guess it's something I didn't think about before, because all eyes are on you. It's not like soccer where there's you can kind of blend in, or you can hide away, or you can have a few good plays and kind of stand back a little bit. But when you're playing baseball, you have all the fielders, but your eyes are mainly on the batter and the pitcher. So it's like everyone's looking at you.
Yeah, and it's an interesting sport because it's a team sport, right? You have 9 guys playing on each team, and you have rosters of 20, 40 guys like any other team. But it's pretty individual. The team's success is pretty closely correlated to my success when I'm pitching. And if I'm a hitter, the team's success is pretty closely correlated to my stat line, my slash line. So it's a really interesting dynamic, right? And that's something I like about baseball as well, is I better the team by bettering myself. And so there's this really interesting component of individual performance within a greater team environment. Whereas, if I'm playing with the best basketball players in the world, I don't need to touch the ball and we're still going to win some games. But if, depending on what pitcher's on the mound, the best team can lose to the worst team can beat the best team based on one player.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting dynamic.
A lot of responsibility.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, man. Well, I'm glad you found something you love, and you put a lot of time into making it a big part of your life, and it's come a long way. Part of Haverford, one of the best teams in the country at the moment, so best offense in the country. So thank you for the time today, and thank you for the invite to Haverford. It's a cool campus.
Yeah, awesome.
And we'll stay in touch. I'm going next week, but when I'm around next summer, we'll probably do something again with Jackson and come back together. But if you're around in Jersey, but it was great to meet you. And
Yeah.
Hope you enjoyed it today.
No, I appreciate having me on. This is awesome.
Perfect. Thanks, man.
Yep, thank you.